It started with 6 words that didn't belong in a child's mouth. 6 words that made a room full of hardened bikers go completely silent. She stood in the doorway, barefoot, shaking, clutching a stuffed toy that had clearly been held through too many bad nights. The men inside had faced violence, prison, and loss, but nothing prepared them for the look in her eyes. She wasn't crying. She was exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from carrying a secret too heavy for small shoulders. This little girl didn't come to the police. She didn't go to her neighbors. She came to the one place everyone in town warned her to avoid. Because sometimes the people society labels as dangerous are the only ones who listen. And sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones you fear most. What these bikers did next didn't just save a child. It split a town in half, exposed a lie everyone believed, and forced an entire community to decide what justice really looks like. Before we go any further, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments. Are you watching from your living room in Atlanta, your kitchen in Chicago, your break room in Los Angeles? Let me know, because this story isn't just about one child or one biker club. It's about kindness under pressure, dignity in humiliation, and how one moment can change everything. This story crosses borders, and I want to see how far it reaches today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We need our voices to be louder. All right, let's go back to where it all started. Harlandville was the kind of town where nothing ever happened. At least, that's what people liked to believe. It was late afternoon when the heat settled heavy over the streets, the sun bleaching the color out of everything it touched. Pickup trucks rolled lazily past the courthouse. The diner on Main Street clinked with forks and coffee cups. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance, reminding everyone that Sunday was coming. And right in the middle of all that normalcy, a little girl walked alone. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked carefully, like every step had to be negotiated with her body. Her name was Aisha. She was 6 years old. She wore a yellow dress with tiny flowers on it, one her mother saved for special days. But today, the hem was dirty, wrinkled from being tugged too many times. Her feet were bare, the soles darkened by gravel and hot pavement. In her arms, she carried a stuffed rabbit with one loose ear, its fur worn thin in places where small fingers had clutched it too tightly for too long. Aisha passed the police station. She slowed there for just a second. Inside, the lights were on. A patrol car sat out front. Safety was supposed to live in that building. Everyone said so. Teachers, neighbors, adults who spoke in confident voices. But Aisha didn't go inside. She kept walking. She passed the church where people prayed for protection every Sunday. She passed the gas station where grown-ups laughed and complained about prices. She passed houses with flags on porches and sprinklers ticking rhythmically over green lawns. No one noticed her, and that was the problem. At the edge of town, where sidewalks disappeared and the road turned rough, stood a building most people avoided. A weathered warehouse with peeling paint. 2 wide garage doors thrown open. The low growl of engines echoed from inside, deep and mechanical, like distant thunder. A hand-painted sign hung crooked over the entrance. Iron Wolves. M-Key. Parents used the place as a warning. Don't go near there. Those men are trouble. Bad people hang out there. Aisha stopped just outside the doorway. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. Inside, grown men stood around motorcycles, laughing, talking, working with their hands. Leather vests, tattoos, beards, heavy boots on oil-stained concrete. They looked exactly like the monsters she'd been told to fear. But monsters, Aisha had learned, didn't always look the way people said they did. Sometimes they wore smiles. Sometimes they wore uniforms. Sometimes they lived in your house. She took one more step forward. The laughter inside the garage faded, one voice at a time, until all that remained was the hum of a fan and the faint tick of cooling metal. 6 men turned to look at her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of them, tall, broad-shouldered, gray threaded through his beard, set his tools down slowly. He wiped his hands on a rag and knelt, bringing himself to her level. His voice was rough but careful. "Hey there," he said. "You lost, sweetheart?" Aisha opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit. Her chin trembled. The words crowded her chest, pressing up against her ribs like they were too big to fit inside her anymore. She hadn't planned what to say. She only knew she couldn't carry it alone anymore. Her voice cracked. The man didn't rush her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell her to calm down. He just waited. And finally, Aisha whispered the words that changed everything. "I can't close my legs." The garage went completely silent. No engines, no laughter, no breathing anyone could hear. 6 grown men, men the town feared, stood frozen, because in that moment they all understood the same terrible truth. This child hadn't come here by accident. She had come here because she had nowhere else left to go. And whatever happened next, there would be no going back. For a long moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, silent, heavy, impossible to ignore. "I can't close my legs." Jax stayed where he was, kneeling in front of Aisha, because something deep inside him understood that standing up too fast, speaking too loudly, doing anything sudden might shatter what little courage it had taken her to say that out loud. Behind him, 6 men who'd survived bar fights, layoffs, divorces, and war zones stood frozen. Spike's beer bottle hovered halfway to his mouth. Forgotten. Doc's hands clenched so tight the knuckles turned white. Shadow, the youngest of them, swallowed hard and looked away, like his eyes needed a second to catch up with his mind. None of them asked the question that burned in their throats. They didn't ask who yet. They didn't ask how. They didn't ask when. Because every one of them knew that asking the wrong thing too soon could send her running. Jax spoke first. His voice was quiet, steady. "Okay," he said. "You don't have to explain anything right now." Aisha looked at him surprised, like she'd expected disbelief, or anger, or laughter. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" he asked. "Only if you want to." She nodded slowly. "It hurts when I sit," she whispered, "and when I walk." That was enough. Jax didn't touch her. He didn't lean closer. He just nodded again, as if she'd handed him something fragile and precious. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That took a lot of courage." No one had ever said that to her before. Spike cleared his throat and pushed a wooden crate forward with his boot. "You can sit here," he said gruffly. "It's steadier." Doc slipped his leather jacket off and gently draped it around her shoulders, keeping his movements slow, visible. The jacket was too big, swallowing her small frame, but she didn't push it away. She tucked her arms inside it like it was armor. Shadow quietly stepped toward the garage door and pulled it halfway closed. Not to trap her, to keep the world out. Aisha's eyes flicked from face to face. They were big men, loud-looking men, the kind of men she'd been warned about. But none of them were yelling. None of them were laughing. None of them were telling her she was wrong, and that confused her. "My mama says I make things up," she said softly. "She says I'm dramatic." Jax felt something crack inside his chest. "Your mama loves you," he said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups don't understand right away. That doesn't mean you're lying." Aisha stared at the floor. "He said nobody would believe me." Jax's jaw tightened, but his voice didn't change. "Who said that, sweetheart?" She hesitated, This time, the silence wasn't shock. It was fear. "He's important," she whispered. "People like him." Spike turned away, pacing once like a caged animal. Doc closed his eyes. Shadow's hands curled into fists. Jack stayed focused on the little girl in front of him. "You don't have to protect anyone here," he said. "We're just listening." Aisha took a shaky breath. "Marcus," she said. The name landed heavy. Marcus Hale. Deputy Sheriff, community hero. The guy whose photo hung on the wall at the station with a gold plaque underneath it. Jax felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Marcus Hale had arrested him once, pulled him over twice, smiled at him like he was doing him a favor every time. And now his name was coming out of a 6-year-old's mouth in a whisper. Doc muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Spike's shoulders rose and fell as he forced himself to breathe. Shadow was already pulling out his phone, not to record, not to post, but to start writing things down. Time, date, exact words, because if the system failed her, someone had to remember. Jax leaned in just a little. "Aisha," he said, "you did the right thing coming here." She looked up at him, eyes wet and searching. "I was scared," she said. "I know," Jax replied, "but you're not alone anymore." For the first time since she'd walked through that doorway, Aisha let herself cry, not in panicked sobs, but quiet tears that slid down her cheeks as the weight of being believed finally settled in. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the road. Inside that garage, 6 men everyone warned her about made a decision without ever saying it out loud. Whatever this was, they weren't turning away. Jax believed in doing things the right way. It wasn't because he trusted the system. It was because he knew exactly what happened when people decided the system didn't matter at all. So the first thing he did, before anger, before plans, before anyone even raised their voice, was reach for his phone. "Aisha," he said gently, "we're going to get you some help, okay?" She nodded, her cheek pressed against the collar of Doc's jacket. Jax stepped a few feet away so she wouldn't hear the words that came next. He called child services. The line rang and rang. A recorded voice came on, cheerful and distant, thanking him for calling and assuring him that his concern was important. He pressed the number for immediate danger. The call dropped. He called again. This time he got transferred, then transferred again, then placed on hold. Behind him, Spike paced the length of the garage like a storm trapped in human form. Doc sat near Aisha, talking softly about motorcycles and asking her what her rabbit's name was. Shadow leaned against a workbench, phone in hand, already noting timestamps like he was afraid time itself might try to erase this. After 20 minutes, someone finally answered. Jax explained carefully, slowly, using the words he'd learned mattered. Child. In pain. Named an adult. Needs help now. The voice on the other end didn't sound alarmed. It sounded tired. "An intake report will be created," the woman said. "Someone will reach out within 72 hours. 72 hours? Jax repeated. "Yes, sir." Jax looked over at Aisha. She was curled up, knees drawn just slightly apart, eyes half-lidded like exhaustion was finally catching up to her fear. "She doesn't have 72 hours, he said. "I understand your concern," the woman replied. "That's the process." The line went dead. Jax stared at his phone for a long second. Then he made another call. The hospital. They moved faster. Not because of who he was, but because of who Aisha was. A child. They loaded her gently into a truck, Spike driving slower than he ever had in his life. Doc sat in the back seat with her, holding the rabbit while she drifted in and out of sleep. Jax followed behind on his bike, every sense sharp, every instinct screaming that this should never have been necessary. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. The nurse behind the desk looked up, took in the tattoos, the leather, the little girl barely standing on her feet, and hesitated. Then she saw Aisha's face. "Exam room 3, she said immediately. No questions, no judgment. A doctor came in, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush. She knelt in front of Aisha the same way Jax had, explaining everything before she did it, asking permission at every step. Jax waited outside. The clock ticked too loudly. When the doctor finally came out, her mouth was set in a tight line. "This child shouldn't be going home tonight," she said quietly. "We're filing a report." Relief hit Jax so hard, his knees nearly gave out. "Thank you," he said. That was when the doors opened. Chief Reed walked in like he owned the place. Crisp uniform, calm smile, authority stitched into every step. "What's going on here?" he asked. Jax turned. "Aisha Johnson," he said. "She named Deputy Marcus Hale." The room went still. The doctor didn't speak. The nurse suddenly found something very interesting on her clipboard. Chief Reed's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Thinner, sharper. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a serious situation," Jax replied. Reed nodded slowly. "We'll handle it from here." The words were smooth, too smooth. Jax watched as Reed stepped past him, lowering his voice, speaking to the doctor like this was a routine inconvenience instead of a child in danger. Minutes later, Jax heard the sentence that made his stomach drop. "She can go home with her mother." Jax stepped forward. "That's a mistake." Reed turned to him, eyes cool. "You've done enough." It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. That night, Jax stood outside the hospital as Aisha was led away, her small hand swallowed by an adult's grip. She looked back once. Just once. And in that moment, Jax knew something with absolute certainty. The system hadn't just failed her, it had chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. By morning, Harlandville had already chosen a story. It just wasn't the truth. Jax knew it the moment he rode down Main Street and felt the looks. Not curiosity, judgment, the kind that hardens fast, like wet concrete. Someone had talked. By 9 a.m., Facebook was on fire. Heard those bikers are spreading lies about Deputy Hale. Figures it's them, always causing trouble. That man has a badge. He protects this town. There was no mention of a little girl, no concern, no questions, just loyalty to the wrong thing. Jax pulled up outside the Iron Wolves clubhouse and cut the engine. The air felt different now, heavier. Someone had spray-painted a thin blue line across the front door overnight. Below it, in sloppy letters, one word: liars. Spike was already there, crouched by his bike, staring at sugar granules glittering inside the gas tank. "They got me too," Doc said from across the lot, holding up his phone. A photo of his slashed tires sat on the screen. "Guess we're popular." Shadow scrolled silently, jaw tight. "Local forums calling for the club to be shut down. Someone tagged the sheriff's page. They're framing this as harassment." Jax exhaled slowly. This was how it always went. A threat to the image became more dangerous than the truth itself. Across town, Marcus Hale showed up to work like nothing had happened. Pressed uniform, easy smile. He shook hands, joked with deputies, posed for a photo with a kid outside the station. Someone posted it with the caption, "Still serving, still strong." That image traveled faster than any report ever could. At the elementary school, Aisha didn't show up. Her teacher asked questions, got told it was a family matter. At the diner, Jax tried to order coffee and was met with silence. The waitress set the mug down hard enough to slosh. "You should leave," she said quietly. People are talking. About what? Jax asked. Her eyes flicked away. About you. At church that Sunday, the sermon wasn't subtle. False accusations, the pastor said, voice ringing with certainty. Wolves in sheep's clothing, men who want to tear down good people instead of looking at their own sins. Half the congregation nodded. The other half stayed quiet. Fear had a way of doing that. That afternoon, Jax's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. You need to stop, the voice said. Calm. Familiar. Marcus. You've done your part, Marcus continued. Now you're crossing lines. Jax said nothing. I'd hate for your club to get shut down, Marcus added, or for accidents to start happening. Bad roads, old bikes. The line went dead. Jax stared at his phone. That night, Shadow came in late, face pale. I pulled public records, he said. Every complaint involving Marcus? Closed. Every one. Same signature, same supervisor. Doc leaned back in his chair. So this isn't new. No, Shadow replied. It's just never been challenged by the wrong people before. Outside, sirens wailed, then passed by. No one was coming. Jax looked around the table at the men everyone warned Aisha about. Their betting will back off, he said, that the noise will scare us. Spike cracked his knuckles. They don't know us very well. Jax nodded, but his voice stayed measured. We don't go loud, he said. We don't go reckless. We don't give them a reason to bury this deeper. Doc frowned. Then what do we do? Jax thought of Aisha's eyes at the hospital, the way she'd looked back. We watch, he said. We document. We wait. Shadow looked up sharply. Wait for what? Jax met his gaze. For the moment when doing nothing becomes worse than doing something. Outside, Harlandville settled into its routines. Lights on, doors locked, comfort restored. Inside the Iron Wolves clubhouse, a line had been crossed. The town just didn't know it yet. The breaking point didn't come with sirens. It came with a phone call that never should have ended the way it did. It was just past midnight when Shadow's laptop chimed. A soft sound, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the clubhouse. He froze. Jax, he said slowly, you need to hear this. The men gathered around as Shadow turned the screen. A waveform moved across it, jagged, uneven. A recorded call. A child's voice, small, strained. I need help, the voice said. Please. It hurts again. The room went still. Jax felt his chest tighten. Shadow's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This came through a public scanner feed before it was categorized. It's a 911 call. They listened. The dispatcher's voice came on. Too calm. Too familiar. Sweetheart, are you sure you're not just scared? Is your mom home? No, the girl whispered. She's at work. A pause. Okay. Try to lie down. Someone will check on you. The call ended. No units dispatched. No follow-up. No report flagged. Shadow swallowed. It was marked non-emergency. Spike slammed his fist into the table hard enough to rattle the tools. She called for help and nobody came. Doc's voice was low. That wasn't a mistake. Jack stared at the frozen waveform. Aisha. She had reached out again, and the system had closed its eyes. That's it, Spike growled. We're done waiting. Jax didn't respond right away, because this was the moment he'd been trying to avoid, the moment where doing the right thing legally collided head-on with doing the right thing morally. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the empty road. His reflection stared back at him. Older, Harder. If they crossed this line, there was no coming back. They wouldn't be witnesses anymore. They'd be targets. "We go in," Spike said. "We get her out." "And then what?" Doc asked. "We become kidnappers?" Shadow looked up. "There's already a narrative against us. If we move wrong, we lose everything, and she still might not be safe." The room fell silent. Jax turned around. "She called for help," he said quietly, "and nobody came." That was the sentence that settled it. They didn't argue after that. They planned. No engines, no vests, no confrontation, just timing. Shadow mapped the area. Back entrance, lighting, neighbors' routines. Doc checked supplies. Spike paced, burning off energy he didn't trust himself to carry inside. Jax thought of one thing only: get her out. They parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot. The night air was thick, buzzing with insects. A porch light flickered across the street, then went dark. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Shadow slipped around back and found a small bathroom window cracked open. He climbed in first, landing silently on tile. Seconds later, the door unlocked from the inside. "She's here," Shadow whispered. "Locked in." Jax's heart hammered as they reached the bathroom door. There was a latch on the outside. That told him everything he needed to know. He flipped it open. Aisha sat on the floor, knees pulled close, eyes red and swollen. When she looked up and saw Jax, her breath hitched. "You came," she whispered. Jax knelt immediately, keeping his voice steady. "We're getting you out of here." Her hands trembled as she reached for him. "But he said," she started. "I know," Jax said. "You didn't do anything wrong." They moved fast. Too fast for fear to catch up. They passed the living room where a man slept on the couch, empty bottle on the floor beside him. Jax didn't look at his face. He didn't need to. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. Jax wrapped Aisha in his jacket and carried her, her small arms clinging to him like she was afraid the ground might disappear. As they reached the bikes, a door slammed behind them. "Hey!" A voice cut through the night. Jax didn't turn around. He swung onto the bike. Aisha pressed safely against him and started the engine. The roar shattered the silence. As they tore down the road, one truth burned clear in Jax's mind. Whatever came next, arrests, trials, headlines, this child would not be left alone again. The road out of Harlandville felt longer than it ever had. Jax kept the bike steady, even as his heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the engine. Aisha pressed against his chest, small arms wrapped tight around his waist, her breath uneven but slowing with every mile that passed beneath them. Behind them, the town slept. Ahead of them, nothing was certain. They didn't stop until the first hint of dawn painted the sky gray, a rest area just beyond the county line. Quiet, empty, safe enough for now. Jax cut the engine and swung off the bike, lifting Aisha carefully. She leaned into him, exhausted, her head resting against his shoulder like she finally believed she wasn't going to be taken back. "You did good," he whispered. "You're safe." She nodded, eyes already drifting closed. Shadow's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. "They've reported it," Shadow said. "Amber Alert's about to go live." Doc exhaled slowly. "So that's it. We're officially the bad guys." Jax nodded once. "We always were going to be." They moved fast after that, into a car, onto a highway, toward the only place left that might actually listen. Shadow had already made the call from a burner, using words that carried weight: child in immediate danger, failure to respond, official misconduct. The state investigator answered. Then the federal line. By the time the sun crested the horizon, agents were waiting. They didn't shout. They didn't draw weapons. They looked at Aisha first. Everything changed after that. A trauma specialist knelt down and spoke to Aisha like she mattered. A paramedic checked her vitals. A blanket appeared. Juice. A clean, stuffed animal offered, not forced. Jax stood back, hands visible, heart braced. "Sir," an agent said, stepping toward him, "I need you to turn around." Jax didn't argue. He put his hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked shut. As they led him away, Aisha looked up, panic flashing across her face. "Don't go," she said. Jax met her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." "I promise." The door closed. The holding room was cold and quiet. A bench bolted to the floor, a camera in the corner. Jax sat, staring at the wall, replaying every decision he'd made. He didn't regret a single one. Hours passed. Outside that room, everything unraveled. Investigators pulled records. They listened to the 911 call. They asked why no one responded. They asked about Marcus Hale. The answers didn't add up. By noon, a warrant was signed. By evening, another door closed, this time on Marcus. The news broke before sunset. Deputy Sheriff arrested. Multiple failures under review. The town erupted. Phones rang off the hook. Reporters flooded in. Neighbors who'd defended Marcus went quiet. Others cried, because now, finally, they believed the children they hadn't believed before. Jax didn't see any of it from the holding room. He heard it in pieces, in footsteps, in raised voices down the hall, in the way the air shifted when people realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning. An agent returned just before midnight. "You're being charged," she said. "But circumstances matter." Jax nodded. "I figured." She hesitated. "The child is safe." Jax closed his eyes. That was enough. When he finally slept, it was the first real sleep he'd had in days. And when Harlandville woke up the next morning, it wasn't the same town anymore. Because once the truth steps into the light, it doesn't go back quietly. Harlandville woke up to cameras. Satellite trucks lined Main Street before most people had finished their morning coffee. Reporters stood in front of the courthouse, microphones poised, repeating the town's name like it had always mattered to the rest of the world. It hadn't. Not until now. The headlines spread faster than the truth ever had before. Local deputy arrested. Child protection failures under state review. At first, people didn't know what to do with it. Some denied it outright. "This is a setup," they said. "Fake news." Those bikers finally got what they wanted. Others stayed quiet. Too quiet. Because in that silence lived recognition, the memory of moments they'd brushed aside, the uneasy feelings they'd ignored, the times a child had gone quiet, withdrawn, changed. At the sheriff's department, doors closed, then reopened. State investigators walked in carrying boxes and warrants. Servers were unplugged, files were pulled, names were written down, not just Marcus Hale's. Every case he'd touched came back under scrutiny. Every report marked unfounded got reopened, and suddenly the pattern was impossible to ignore. At the hospital, the doctor who'd spoken up finally exhaled. At the dispatch center, a supervisor was escorted out quietly. At City Hall, an emergency meeting was called behind closed doors. The town was learning something it didn't want to learn. That reputation was not the same thing as character. Across the county, phones rang in homes that had been silent for years. Parents got calls asking questions they'd once begged officials to ask. Adults who'd been told they were overreacting were suddenly being taken seriously. Some cried, some raged, some sat in stunned quiet, realizing they hadn't imagined it after all. At the federal building, Aisha sat wrapped in a blanket, coloring quietly while a woman spoke to her in a soft voice. No rushing, no pressure, just listening. For the first time, no one told her to calm down. No one told her she was confused. No one told her she was dramatic. Every word mattered. Down the hall, Jax waited. He didn't see the reporters, didn't hear the rumors. He heard the door open. An agent stepped in and sat across from him. "You're being charged," she said plainly. "But the prosecutor is considering context." Jax nodded. "I expected that." She studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you just walk away?" Jax didn't answer right away. Because the answer was simple. "Because she asked for help," he said. "And nobody came." The agent looked down at her folder. Outside, the town was splitting down the middle. Some doubled down on denial. Flags went up. Posts got louder. Accusations flew. Others did something harder. They apologized. A teacher wrote a public letter admitting she'd ignored warning signs. A grandmother called her granddaughter after years of silence. A neighbor brought flowers to the Iron Wolves clubhouse and left them without saying a word. At the diner, the waitress who'd told Jax to leave stared at the TV behind the counter, eyes wet. By nightfall, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't about bikers versus cops anymore. It was about who listened and who didn't. And once that question was asked, it couldn't be unanswered. Harlandville wasn't just watching the fallout. It was living in it. And tomorrow, the town would have to decide what to do with the truth, now sitting squarely in the middle of everything. The truth didn't arrive quietly. It settled over Harlandville like a weight, heavy, unavoidable, pressing into every conversation and every silence. By the end of the week, the flags came down. The social media posts slowed. The arguments ran out of breath. Because facts have a way of exhausting lies. Court documents were released, timelines laid out, reports compared. A pattern emerged so clearly that even the most loyal defenders stopped speaking in absolutes. Marcus Hale was no longer Deputy Hale. He was an inmate awaiting trial, and the town had to sit with that. At City Hall, meetings stretched late into the night. Policies were reviewed, people resigned, others were quietly removed. The words oversight and accountability started appearing in official statements, words that felt hollow until paired with action. Some parents couldn't sleep. They replayed memories they'd once brushed off. A child who suddenly hated bedtime, a mood that changed for no clear reason, a silence that had been easier to ignore than confront. Guilt moved through the town like a second shadow. At the federal building, Aisha sat with a counselor and colored a picture of a house with a tree and a sun in the corner. When asked where the people were, she drew them close together. "They listen," she said simply. She asked about Jax every day, not with fear, with concern. "Is he in trouble because of me?" The answer was always the same. "No. You didn't do anything wrong." Jax stood before a judge 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Media, locals, strangers who'd driven hours just to see what justice would look like when the lines blurred. The charges were read: kidnapping, interference, violation of an order. Jax didn't argue. He didn't posture. He stood there the same way he'd knelt in that garage, still, steady, unflinching. The judge looked down at the file, then up at the man in front of him. "You broke the law," he said. "Yes, sir," Jax replied. The judge paused. "You also stopped something worse from continuing." Silence filled the room. "Context matters," the judge continued. "And so does courage." The gavel came down. Charges dismissed. Not because the law didn't matter, but because sometimes justice has to acknowledge reality. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Jax didn't stop. He rode back to the clubhouse. A small figure waited there. Aisha stood beside her foster mother, clutching a familiar stuffed rabbit. She smiled when she saw him. "You came back," she said. Jax knelt. "I told you I would." She hugged him, quick, fierce, real. In the months that followed, Harlandville changed. Not perfectly, not all at once, but it changed. Training programs were added, hotlines were reviewed, policies rewritten. More importantly, conversations started happening in homes where silence used to live. At the Iron Wolves clubhouse, the blue paint was scrubbed away. Someone left a note on the door one morning. No name. "Thank you for listening when we didn't." And Aisha? She went to school again. She laughed. She slept through the night. She learned something that would stay with her longer than fear ever could. That when she spoke, someone listened. That when she asked for help, it came. That monsters don't always look like monsters. And heroes don't always look safe. Sometimes, they look like the people everyone warned you about. And sometimes, the bravest thing a town can do is admit it learned too late and promise to do better next time.